Hey everybody, so this is page 4. Hopefully you've noticed that we're looking at characterization, specifically looking at growth, as well as the conflict in the story, specifically the internal conflict, because how the internal conflict is resolved kind of will help us lead to the theme of the story, which will come into play later in this lesson. All right, so even though the boy, he said, still looking at me, bears the white man's name, and the medicine bag will be his. I didn't know what to say. At the same time, that hot and cold feeling I had when I first saw Grandpa in the street. Anyway, see if my camera starts recording. There he goes. Okay, so like I was saying, we're looking for characterization, everything else. My bad, everyone. My camera skipped. I don't know what happened. But I was right here. I could never wear such a thing. I almost said out loud. So right here, this little underline part, this is a perfect example of our internal conflict we've been talking about. He doesn't want to wear it. He's seen it. It's that musty old leather bag that his grandpa has around the street. He calls it a dirty leather pouch. Okay, so you can see that he is ashamed or embarrassed of the medicine bag. So this is where his whole embarrassed of his culture and the things that his grandpa does sometimes comes into play. I thought of having my friends see it in gym class at the swimming pool and could imagine smart things they would say. I just swallowed hard and took a step towards the bed. I knew I would have to take it. However, he still feels that sense of duty. So even though he has that internal conflict going on, he does feel dutiful to his grandpa and will do what he needs to do. So there's a little bit of a flip-flop going on here. But Grandpa was tired. Now, Martin, he said, waving his hand in dismissal, it's not the time. I will sleep now. So that's how Grandpa came to be with us for 2 months. My friends kept asking to come see the old man, but I put him off. I told myself that I didn't want them laughing at Grandpa, but even as I made excuses, I knew it wasn't Grandpa I was afraid they'd laugh at. So we're continuing with this internal conflict with how he's dealing with his grandpa. And in this particular case, he's worried about his friends. And if you guys remember in that video I talked about earlier where I said I imagine that he's anywhere between 13 and 15, isn't worrying about what your friends think a very 13 to 15-year-old thing to do? Yeah. Nothing bothered Cheryl about bringing her friends to see Grandpa. Every day after school started, there'd be a crew of giggling little girls or round-eyed little boys crowded around the old man on the patio, where he'd gotten into the habit of sitting every afternoon. So you can see again, they're comparing the characters so that you can see okay, see that. They're comparing Cheryl and the narrator. So you guys can see how the narrator is ashamed. So it just pulls out his in this particular case, he's ashamed of himself. His sister doesn't care, so why should he care? But yet, he still does. Grandpa would smile in his gentle way, patiently answering their questions, or he'd tell them stories of brave ghost warriors, animals, and the kids listened in awed silence. Those little guys thought Grandpa was great. Finally, one day after school, my friends came home with me because nothing I'd said stopped them. We're going to see the great Indian of Bellevue Drive, said Hank, who was supposed to be my best friend. My brother has seen him 3 times, so he ought to be well enough to see us. When we got to my house, Grandpa was sitting on the patio. He had on his red shirt, but today he also wore a fringed leather vest that was decorated with beads. Instead of his usual cowboy boots, he had a solidly beaded moccasins on his feet that stuck out from his black trousers. Of course he had on his old black hat on. He was seldom without it. But it had been brushed, and the feather of the beaded headband was proudly erect, its tip brighter white. His hair lay in strands over his red-collared shirt collar, and I just stared as my friends did, and I heard one of them murmur, "Wow." All right, so now we have this moment. So we have some direct characterization about Grandpa. Again, we're getting this great description of Grandpa, and it tells us just this proud Native American man doing his old man thing on the porch, right? And then we get this reaction from his friends, which we know that this is not what the narrator expected. Okay, so the narrator was expecting them to tease his grandpa, to like not think his grandpa was cool, but just on first sight, they're like, wow. Okay, Grandpa looked up and his eyes met mine. They twinkled as if they were laughing inside. He nodded to me and my face got all hot. So again, if someone's face gets all hot, it has something to do with being embarrassed more than anything. That's one of those times where you kind of have to know that figure of speech. I could tell he had known all along that I was afraid he'd embarrass me in front of my friends. So this is one of those times, again, we're addressing that internal conflict. But what's weird is Grandpa knows. Like this internal conflict that he thought he was dealing with all by himself, Grandpa knows. How? Oh, silly boys. I don't know how to say never make words. I'm sorry. He greeted and held out his hand. My buddies passed in single file and shook his hands as I introduced them. They were so polite, I almost laughed. How there, Grandpa, and even how do you do there, sir? So you can see, again, not what he expected. So we have these boys who he thought were going to make fun of his grandpa or tease him later. They're taking it really, really seriously and really are being very respectful to his grandpa. You look fine, Grandpa, I said as the guys sat in the lawn chairs on the patio floor. Han, yes, he said. He agreed. I woke up this morning. It seemed like the right time dressed in good clothes. I knew my grandson was bringing his friends. So again, it goes with that paragraph right here. It just reinforces that Grandpa knows. All right. So this video is a little bit longer than the last one, but I hope it was helpful. We're still seeing that internal conflict build where he was really nervous about his friends, laughing at his grandpa, and because he's nervous about it, that embarrassment about his culture and his heritage is kind of reaching its peak in the story.